Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this session where we're talking about Africa, its young people, and their tomorrow. My name is Godfrey Mutizwa. I'm a journalist. I've been at this I'm very happy to say this year, for 40 years. I've told a few stories about the continent and where we've come from, but I have to say I'm excited about where we are going as a continent. I wanted to begin with a look back at last year's elections. And I think for many people, it was the huge number of elections that we had. But it was not just about the numbers. 19 in total they were at the end of the day. But there were some very surprising outcomes. Let me share a couple. The success of what I'm going to call protest votes in a number of countries. I think those of you who follow the continent will remember the results. Mauritius, South Africa, and of course, Botswana, right? The second surprise for me were the brave votes that we saw in South Africa and Mozambique. And I'm saying brave because I think for the first time in Southern Africa, we saw voters telling former liberation parties, hello, what you guys are doing, we don't like, we would like to change. And we know, as I speak, Mozambique is still simmering. But unfortunately, the credibility as well as the quality of some of the elections remains a clear constant. And the continent's young voters have spoken, but still, we do not have quite the environment that we'd like for them to be able to express their choices, but they were clear. So with the two, I'm asking, that's the question that I have here really, for the world's youngest continent, you may well be asking, well, that's why we are here, and we are with Botswana's youngest ever leader, whose umbrella for democratic change ended, of course, the 58-year rule of the Botswana Democratic Party. So please, help me to welcome him.
Thank you very much.
It is his first World Economic Forum as head of state, so let's make it special for him. Also, please help me to welcome Leila Fourie, CEO, Johannesburg Stock Exchange. For those who do not know, the JSE is 138 years old. Joining us as well, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, Mr. Amgele Mene. SG, welcome.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Mr. Samaila Zubairu, who is the CEO of the Africa Finance Corporation. He's been talking infrastructure for a while. Thank you. Mr. President, my question is going to come to you first. And really, as a young leader, you will excuse me for saying so. I'm sure you're looking at my head. I just want to know what your priorities are as you come into this important role that gives you an opportunity to reshape as well as redirect or perhaps propel Botswana's progress.
Well, thank you very much. I gratefully acknowledge each and every one of you. The first thing that we need to appreciate as the African continent is that we have done very badly when it comes to democratic governance and the running of the democratic process, which is why it seems somewhat shocking, surprising, something of an anomaly when power changes, because it occasions a great deal of consternation, a great deal of anxiety. We're never sure whether it will happen at all. There's a problem with the faith and confidence of the population in the democratic apparatus, and whether those who are in power are fully committed to the fundamental tenets of democracy. And so when, as it happened in Botswana, a party that had been in power for 58 years faced the unexpected spectacle of a decisive loss at the polls, many may have felt will this outcome be accepted? Will power really change? Well, it did in Botswana. It was peaceful, it was seamless, it was orderly. And the president who had lost, well before he did lose, sent me a message and said to me, "It seems your party is doing extremely well. It's early days yet, but congratulations." I said, "Thank you very much." And he said, "We're hoping that we'll bounce back." And so one went through the 2 days of counting, collation and tallying, fearing, dreading the power of the bounce back if it did take place at all. But it didn't happen. And so the very next morning, before the outcome was declared, when the pattern was now firm, clear, he called me. And that was before the outcome was declared. Counting was still going on. We hadn't reached the number that we had to meet of constituencies. And he said to me, "Be ready. I'm going to address a press conference at which I'm going to concede. And so I'm going to call you from the conference venue so that the press can capture this." And I assured him that I was ready. And he did call me a few minutes later and make the concession publicly. And that was before the outcome was fully known. That was in the morning, around 9 a.m. And the winning numbers were reached in the afternoon. So well before the afternoon, he had reconciled himself with the eventuality. And I say this so that we appreciate that there was never any indication, the slightest hint of a subversion of the democratic outcome. This is to demonstrate the commitment of this particular leader, who's in an unenviable situation. He is losing an election. His party has been in power for 58 years. He's served but only one term. He would have loved, in fact, he expected, he felt strongly that he was going to get a second term. He didn't. At that critical moment, he had to make a decision. Does he stand firm on the principles of democracy, or he plays the usual games played on the African continent to subvert the will of the people? He chose to be a Democrat to the core. And that cemented the credentials of Botswana as not just a democracy, but an exemplar of democratic practice. It says, our democratic roots run deep. We are truly a democracy. And so I'm most grateful. And this is a lesson we would like to impart. Now, we must recognize that this democracy, of which we are so proud, requires deepening, requires constant refreshing and improvement. We must recognize, and we are concerned about young people, that they had not registered in quite the huge numbers that we would have wanted. And it is not because they are not interested. It is not because they are disaffected. Sometimes it is because the processes themselves do not conduce to the energy and vitality of young people. They want to be able to come in, cast their vote and go. They don't have the patience to stand in line for hours on end. And so when they do not come, sometimes it's a vote of no confidence on the processes themselves. They are saying, these are not designed with us in mind. And so we need now to reconfigure the entire repertory of institutions on the African continent, in the democratic space, in trade and commerce, to recognize, to embrace the energy and vitality of young people. so that they can participate, so that even the language spoken is pretty much their lingo. And so that we don't speak in esoteric terms when we're basically dealing with the transient problems that trouble them on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And so this is, I think, a lesson for us all. And I think my priority is in ensuring the active participation and leadership of young people, which is why when I was faced with the appointment of a cabinet, I felt, because the democratic process is not so hospitable to their participation, both at the level of lack of resources to participate in what is an expensive process, I felt that we needed to engage in some affirmative action. And so right now, Botswana has one of the youngest, if not arguably the youngest minister on the African continent, who is the Minister of Youth and Gender Affairs. And so we've set ourselves on this path to practically involve young people, even when the democratic process would have kept them at the margins. So we want to place them front and center so that they are visible. They tell their story. They demonstrate their capabilities. So thank you very much.
And congratulations to you for being able to do that and for committing to continue to do so. Just one quick follow-up from my side would be, obviously they turned to you because they felt that the establishment was not taking care of their needs. So I wanted to give you an opportunity. Here you are at the World Economic Forum, where you are speaking to investors from the African continent, from countries outside the African continent. What message are you taking to those people? And what do you say to them about investing in Botswana, and investing in Botswana within the context of probably the second biggest decision that's ever been made on the African continent, which is, of course, the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area?
Well, the starting point really is where Botswana wants to go. And this is that the country must be powered on two engines. The one is the green economy. The other is the digital economy. And when we talk the digital economy, we basically are referring to young people. We have, as I said, to reconfigure the institutions, the routines that we are so used to, which have marginalized young people. We now have to bring them on board. They need to have access to skills, not just academic training, skills, the ability to deploy these skills to solve problems. And we know that young people, when it comes to the digital space, they are natives of that space. Many children don't need to go to school. I've seen little children scrolling on their cell phones, playing games and doing things that I find somewhat challenging for me. And I realize this is their space.
Absolutely.
And so we need to make them comfortable, broaden and expand this space for them, so that the entire education system is itself constructed around empowering them in this space. When we do this and recognize this as their space, we then enable them to drive innovation, to deploy their creativity in the areas of tourism, in the development of applications that solve problems, that harness data, make the data available to them, and then also having equipped them with the skills, give them access to affordable finance. Thank you very much.
I was listening to a session that took place in this room before we started our own session, and Strive Masiwa, the entrepreneur who built up Econet Wireless in Zimbabwe, was talking about the fact that Africa is short of capital, but it's not short of entrepreneurs. And we're going to come back and talk about perhaps some of the areas that we need to look for from a policy perspective and how we calibrate those youth and make sure that they are participants. SG, I want to come to you. I posed the question to the President, and I'm going to come back to you, Mr. President, in terms of the AFCFTA and your view. But I wanted to come to you and talk a little bit about how you view young democracies, not young democracies, sorry, the young leadership that we're seeing coming onto the continent in terms of their inclusion and participants in the African Continental Free Trade Area. When the AFCFTA was launched in Kigali in 2018, President Cyril Ramaphosa spoke about a boat that would lift all boats, including small and big nations. Has the AFCFTA been able to do that?
Well, thank you very much. First, let me appreciate the opportunity to be here with this very, very distinguished panel. Excellency President, congratulations on your decisive victory. We have come a long way since President Ramaphosa made that statement on the 18th of March in 2018 in Kigali. We have, through the heads of states, have agreed on two very important instruments that will impact directly on young people and SMEs. First, the protocol on women and youth in trade. The first protocol of that nature around the world, first of its kind, which takes us really well and beyond the aspirations for women-owned businesses, youth-owned businesses, and takes us into the realm of legally codified obligations. That is a very important step forward. Second, we have established the protocol on digital trade. The last instrument of that protocol will be adopted by our heads of states next month in Addis. And the protocol on digital trade responds exactly to what His Excellency the President has just said. The innovation, the cutting edge spirit of innovation of young Africans, the ability to create entrepreneurship through Africa's digital economy. By the year 2050, Africa will have the youngest working force in the world. Those jobs will have to be created intra-Africa. We will not be able to import jobs from somewhere else. And so Africa's digital economy, we believe, is a very, very important aspect of overall intra-Africa trade. And it includes actually day-to-day, it addresses day-to-day challenges that all of us battle with. The issue of payments, for example. I live in Ghana. There's a direct flight to Nigeria. When I travel to Nigeria, I take my direct flight. But when I send money, it goes somewhere else. It should not be, it should be the same that we have a seamless, interoperable payment system in Africa to address this challenge of youth unemployment. We also, in the same protocol, have far-reaching provisions on emerging technologies, on inclusion of SMEs, which will create an environment where we will see more investment in digital public infrastructure. And so, whilst we have come a long way, we do recognize that we have much work still has to be done. But I believe that, as in any endeavor, the starting point has got to be to write the laws. That is how the investors around me will have the confidence to invest in digital technologies in Africa, to invest in youth entrepreneurship, and finally, also to invest in trade finance. And I'll end on this point of, in this segment, in this point of trade finance, the cost. The cost, as His Excellency was saying, the cost of trade finance is prohibitive. Africa's contribution, the largest contributor to Africa's GDP are SMEs and mainly youth. And yet the the cost of money for them to trade across borders is disproportionately high. So we have to work together with development finance institutions, commercial banks, to see how we can mobilize resources to reduce the cost of money for trade in Africa. The large corporations, big companies, they are okay. They can access markets overnight. But SMEs will need support for trade finance. And so that's where we need Africa Finance Corporation, AFDB, Afrexim Bank to mobilize and pool resources so that we can improve the availability and affordability of money for trade.
SG, you have actually framed my question the correct way that I wanted it done to Leila and to Samaria. So I'm going to start with you, Leila. You answer the question. How do you provide a platform that is able to provide the huge amounts of capital that are required on the continent? But he said it at in a cost-effective manner, but also reaching the young people. And I know this is a challenge, right? I think, have been writing stories about how the JSE has been trying to make sure that it widens the companies that are listed on the stock exchange. And I guess this is a challenge that you have every day.
Godfrey, indeed. And on the continent, there are a number of challenges that we are facing in accessing capital. And it's not only limited to the SMEs and the young, it's particularly bad there, but it's across the board. The IMF indicates of the 19 countries that's in Africa that they have data for, the average private lending rate is 25%. Sure. In Southeast Asia, India, it's around 9%. And so you can imagine the cost of capital is crippling and stifling our growth initiatives. In addition to that, I think one of the big contributors of that is sovereign ratings, which tend to overestimate the risk relative to the actual default rates. And I see Sanders in the audience, the UN Global Compact put out a report indicating that or referencing the IFC default rates, which are sitting at about 3.5%, the recovery rates, which are sitting at around about 75% for Africa. S&P rates are 70% recovery rates and 3.4% default rates. So the concept that quantitatively the losses are much higher in Africa is flawed. And I think this comes to some of the points that His Excellency was making, which is there is a qualitative assessment focused on policy certainty, on government, etc. And so what are we doing about it in the continent? There is a lot that needs to happen in integrating across our African countries.
Including the exchanges.
Exactly. So the African Exchange Linkage Project is a project which has integrated, as of September 2 years ago, a number of trading engines to allow trading to happen across the different countries. One of the biggest problems in capital flows is the lack of liquidity. Large investors have liquidity mandates and they won't invest in corporates or in countries where the liquidity is too low. So we need to scale up, and we do that through harmonization of regulation. The African Stock Exchanges Initiative is currently going through a regulatory harmonization process. They are looking to harmonize listings requirements. Of course, that would create a catalyst to create cross-country listings, which generates more liquidity.
Is it an easy conversation, Leila? Please be honest.
It's a difficult conversation because we need to go at the pace of the slowest mover. And so there are disparate and very different regulatory regimes across the continent, and aligning those is a lengthy process. I think in addition to that, there's a lot of proactive work that can be done around, for example, green products, which could be aligned. The JSE has recently launched a carbon market. We're talking to some of our other exchanges to create a cross-continental network. And so there is a lot happening. I think the pace of change needs to speed up.
Yeah, you spoke about silence. I'm hoping that the room is not silent because the phones are silent. The phones must be busy. The hashtag is WEF 2025, and please be as interactive as you can. And of course, we're trying to reach the young people, Your Excellency, because that, as you said, this is where they live, right? Right. Samaila, let me come to you. I want you to weigh in as well on this whole idea of trying to make sure that we are able to find a space, as it were, on the table for our young people. You are working on a number of big projects, and we'll talk about the big one that you are working on. But I just wanted initial thoughts in terms of how we make sure we do not leave our young people and their part and parcel of this big project, which is the FTA.
Thank you very much, and thanks to WEF for convening this event, and to the partners here, especially His Excellency, and my friend Leila, and of course my brother Wamkele. I would like to give us a different perspective on how to mobilize capital. And I want us to understand that it takes time, and we must be intentional about it. And once we start the hard work, then we'll start to get the results. So it starts by first taking a look at how our economies are structured. We're largely primary economies, whereby we are producing primary goods and exporting primary goods without any, I would say, value addition, no ability to create quality jobs, and no ability to build the savings that will lead to capital formation and a viable banking system. So if we take a step back and be intentional about capturing and retaining value within the economies, we'll be able to create quality jobs. Those employees will pay taxes that can be used to build schools for education. Those employees will make savings that will go to mutual funds and stock exchanges, savings accounts. Those savings would be used for pensions. Those pensions will be available to build infrastructure. They'll be available to pension managers to allocate, for venture capital, for private equity, and then we'll be able to finance ventures by young people. So it is a chain that needs to be in place, and it starts by taking intentional decisions that will stop exporting raw materials, that will process whatever we have, create quality jobs that would pay quality wages and engage quality youth, provide them opportunities for innovation. And once that is in place, we can work with the government. So for example, if the president is keen, we can work with him. We can create, a program where we can provide, guarantees for pension funds to invest in youth entrepreneurship, in venture capital. We can create a program whereby pension funds in Botswana will not need to invest outside the continent. We'll create them the risk structures for them to invest on the continent. That way we have the capital formation that goes to fund venture for young people. So these are things that can be done. All the economies that you see happen that way. So it is the initial investment by pension funds in the like of Apple and Microsoft that led to where they are today. I met someone recently that said they invested, $15,000 in Snap, in the idea of Snap. And you know what that is? It was a pension fund that did that. So we have to change our pension rules, make sure that they can invest in venture capital, make sure they can invest across the continent, and that way we build, the capital that we need. Then we also need to be intentional about capitalizing our banks. We have to capitalize banks locally, give them a high bar, of what they can invest in, and then they will mobilize the capital, and then they'll invest. If you don't have local banks or domestic resources, there can be no development. We need to also think about how we are, I would say, emphasizing reserves for payment of imports. No, we should have reserves to pay for investments. Invest in infrastructure, invest in capitalizing, local banks, regional banks, for investment across the continent.
Sure. Thank you for that. And I'll ask the president to respond perhaps to your suggestion about what you could do to try to raise capital in Botswana and other African countries. But I wanted to ask you, are you seeing any evidence? Do you have any examples around the continent where you are beginning to see governments that think like that are actually thinking outside the box, besides simply saying, we're going to worry about the policy environment and then we're going to leave it there?
Yes, we do.
Please
and
share.
I'll give examples. So in Nigeria, there was a pension reform that had a move to contributory pension schemes. And there was a process to license local pension fund administrators. There was an asset allocation that was given to them. First, it was government bonds, listed equities, and then we engaged with them to tell them that, look, if you don't create a room for investments in infrastructure, investment in private equity, investments in venture, your pensioners will have to buy generators and diesel, when they retire. So you need to create a program for investments in infrastructure on a long-term basis. You need to create a program for investments in industrialization that creates quality jobs for people, for the children of your pensioners. So they agreed and they created a window for 5% investment in infrastructure, equity, 15% allocation in infrastructure bonds, and 5% allocation in private equity and venture capital. On the back of that, we joined together with the Sovereign Fund, Sovereign Investment Authority of Nigeria, to create a company called InfraCredit that was providing guarantees to this pension funds to invest in infrastructure and industrialization.
Sure.
So we're able to move from the local banks just doing 1, 2, 3 year money to making investments of 10, 15, 20 years.
Sure.
So it is possible,
Yeah.
and it can be replicated. We're having conversations in Kenya now. This morning I had conversations with the government of Angola, and they're all thinking about how to replicate this structure. So
Yeah.
it is possible.
Yeah, I want to come back to you and give you an opportunity to talk about your big baby that you have just launched. I think we all watched with excitement as you met President Joe Biden and you spoke about the Lobito corridor. But Mr. President, you had some of the ideas that he has. So I wanted to say to you, respond if you like. And also, I'm giving you the opportunity to say to investors who may well be listening now, sell Botswana if you can in terms of investments that you would like to see funded and that you'd like to see investors come in for in Botswana and create jobs for local people and opportunities for entrepreneurship.
Thank you very much. First, let me accept your invitation
Let's call it a challenge.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
that you want to work with Botswana to bring about some institutional redesign of the financial space. We also are in the process of reviewing on the trot and changing some of the laws and regulations. We have laws that say a certain percentage, which is started off as I think over 80%, was reduced to 70% of the pension funds must be invested outside the country. And so we are in the process of trying to go that route. And I think with your experience and expertise and the
money.
work that you are doing
And money.
of course, money, we should be able to progress fairly rapidly in those regards. Botswana has a very stable environment, very safe, very convenient for business. In terms of credit ratings, it's one of 2 in the continent, Botswana and Mauritius, credit rated, with all the flaws and shortcomings of that system. We've managed to make some of the cuts.
Sure.
And we believe that we will do even better. And so there's every reason to come and invest in Botswana. The challenge that governments have created for themselves, and so they face, is the red tape. The time lag between when ideas come forth, and when they can be translated into some concrete action and deliverables. And these actions and deliverables sound in human life, sometimes in human tragedy. They sound in the marginalization and exclusion of young people and women. So we want to make sure that we close the chasm between word and deed in order to ensure that we bring young people into the fold as quickly as possible.
Sure.
And so we trust that we will work together. I am extremely excited at the prospect. And
I will find your minister before we leave.
it falls in line squarely with what we are currently engaged in.
And I'm going to follow up that story, Your Excellency, I can assure you.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to
Actually, Boholo is a good friend of mine, so I can
yeah.
also just talk to her and see how
Please
we
do. Please do. And,
Leila, if I can
Other
come to you
ministers,
very quickly, and I'm going to combine two questions really for you. One is around this green finance that we've been talking about. Maybe just share very quickly, if you can, just how that would work and whether the continent is suitable for that type of finance. And then lessons from abroad. I saw a recent research report from the World Federation of Exchanges where they were talking about how capital markets can be used to catalyze growth on the continent. And they show that actually in developing countries, it's not as good as it is in developed countries. How do we fix that?
Indeed. So the report done by the World Federation of Exchanges indicated, it analysed the effect of growth on the exchange and vice versa. And it indicated that in emerging markets, it's unidirectional, that effect, and in developed markets, it's bidirectional. So the economy grows the exchange grows the economy. The purpose of an exchange is twofold. Firstly, to ensure that there is access to capital, and Samala really explained this very well. So small, medium companies that soon will become top 40 companies need to access capital formation, debt or equity. And then it's to ensure that the man on the ground, investors, have an opportunity to use their savings, which may well be pension fund savings, to grow and develop their wealth and develop prosperity. Now, the problem in emerging markets is that we don't see that connection. And one of the things that affects that is that the external investors' perception of a country will determine whether they invest in that country. And so many times, if there is a over-indexing of the risk, if there is a lack of certainty, policy certainty, lack of growth, the investors are not providing the capital to grow the economy.
Sure.
I'll switch now to the second question
Green finance, if you can,
that you asked about, and that is really about the green economy, and that's one of the solutions. So, of course, all the solutions that could solve that first problem is making sure that there is credible systems, credible regulation that in a time of crisis can be relied upon and can be consistently approached. In terms of the green products, the JSE, together with a number of our neighbouring countries, Nigeria, Kenya, Botswana, have done a lot of work in developing new solutions, green bonds, social bonds, sustainable bonds, which is really debt financing for green projects, climate-related projects, social projects like education, schools, hospitals, etc. And it's been proven that those products are generating a much higher take-up and, in many instances, better returns. So those are working very well.
Yeah.
And then carbon markets across the continent.
Absolutely. I wish I had more time because I wanted to take you up on this whole perception of risk and Africa and the association, and yet the figures show, and this is research by S&P, as you said, as well as Moody's, that shows that actually Africa pays its debts better than other parts of the world. But another day, another conversation. SG, I'm coming to you, and then I'd like to open the session to a couple of questions from our guests that we have here with you. SG, I would be wrong if I don't give you an opportunity to sell as well, the AfCFTA.
Well, let me just answer a question that you did not ask.
Okay.
And that is how do we intend once this capital is mobilized.
I wanted to. And I wanted to ask whether you actually have any conversation between the two of you, but
Where,
I'm running
where
out
is
of
it
time.
going to be deployed, how and by whom? I think I agree entirely with the colleague panelists. The big challenge that we have is risk mitigation optimization. How do we make sure that our commercial banks are able to undertake these risks to onward lend to the young entrepreneur who will then export from Nigeria to Kenya and so on. This is where the big challenge for us is. And the AFCFTA, this is now to your point about selling it, establishes the legal framework for an open market of 1.4 billion people. That is projected by the Brookings Institute by the year 2035 to be close to $16.2 trillion. But that market will remain fragmented if we don't accelerate integration and create a single market for movement of goods, movement of persons, movement of capital, reduction of intra-Africa barriers to investment. Intra-Africa investment is at only 4%. So this is the value proposition the AFCFTA advances to investors, African investors.
Yeah.
And it's very important that African investors invest as a starting point, for example, in Africa's digital economy. By